Good afternoon. This is the fifth in a series of tales or lessons from my journey across Canada this summer. And this one is about my wolf encounter. So the wolf encounter started when a fellow pulled up on the highway in front of me, got out of his truck, came towards me, and asked me if I'd seen the wolf and did I know that I was being tracked. And I said, no, I hadn't seen him and I didn't know. And he said, well, I've driven by you twice now and there's a wolf tracking you. And I said, okay. And he said, I'm going to drive by and drive down the road and blow my horn. And then he says, I'll circle around and I'll come back by you and do it again. And so he did. He drove down the highway blowing his horn, and then kind of disappeared, circled around. The highway is divided at this point, and you can't really see the other two lanes going in the other direction. And so he disappeared. A few minutes later, he's coming back down the highway towards me, and he stopped, and he said, well, I saw it again, and I've been blowing my horn. And he says, have you got any protection? And I said, no. He said, have you got wolf spray or bear spray? And I said, no. And he said, do you have a gun? And I said, no. And he said, do you have a knife? And I said, well, I do. And he said, well, I'll drive down the highway again and blow my horn. But he said, aren't you scared? And I said, no, I can't really be scared. I've been walking for, I think at that point it was, it was May 24th, so about 40 days, 60 days really. And I said, I've been camping every night for 60 days, so I'm never sure what's in the forest. and he says, well, just be careful. He says, wolves can be dangerous. So I said, okay. And so then off he went down the road, and I realized the knife that I told him I had was in the bottom of my knapsack and in the trailer, and it would probably take me 20 minutes to get it out, so it wasn't really much good as a defense. So I kept on walking, and I guess he rattled me a little, because I hadn't thought about wolves. I hadn't thought much about bears or really anything, and I came upon this piece of metal rod lying beside the highway. And so I bent down and picked it up. And I thought, this can be used for defense. This can be my weapon. So I picked it up and I'm walking along, and after about, 20 or 30 steps, I kind of looked down at my hand holding this metal rod, and I thought, I'm carrying his fear with me. This isn't my fear. I've been rattled, and now I'm carrying his fear, and it doesn't feel right. So I threw the metal rod back in the ditch, and kept walking. And sure enough, I went over a little hill, and there, sitting beside the highway, probably about 60 feet away, was the wolf, and he was just sitting there watching me. And so I stopped and looked at him, and I talked to him, and took his picture. I posted that earlier on my walk, and then that was kind of it. He turned around, and he kind of trotted off into the bush, and I kept walking. And probably about 5 minutes later, I felt his spirit walking beside me, and it was so real. He was on the right-hand side. It was so real that I actually looked down to my side, thinking I would see him, I guess. But it was so tangible. He was right there, and it lasted for, maybe 10 seconds, and then it was gone, and I kept walking. And so kept walking, appreciated the visit, and then the weather started turning, and it got really nasty, really cold, really wet, and I'd already had a few cold nights, and I thought, well, maybe tonight's the night for a motel. And so I got on my phone and took a look what was coming up, and Falcon Lake was coming up, and it was there was only one motel in Falcon Lake. So I phoned it, and it turned out it was kind of a fancy lodge, a little more exquisite than what I was planning on sort of spending the night at. So I just I didn't book a place, and so I kept walking, and it got colder and wetter, and it was not looking like it was going to be a good night. And then this other fellow pulls up, and he gets out of his truck, and he says, "Do you know you're being tracked by a wolf?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." I said, "I had a visit from a fellow about an hour ago." And he said, "Yeah, that was my councilman." Turned out this guy was the second guy was the chief of the local band. And he knew the first fellow that had stopped by, and so we talked for quite a while. He had walked across Canada himself as part of a group, an RCMP group, raising awareness for Indigenous children. And so he kind of knew what I was up against, and he asked me if where I was staying tonight, and I said, well, I'm in a tent, and I wild camp, and so I said, I'm not really sure until I get there, and it was pouring rain whilst we were talking, and he was just standing there in his coat and getting wet, and his wife was in the truck, and so we talked a little more, and we talked about the wolf a little, and then he wandered off. He said, I'll see you later. And I said, okay. And so I kept walking, and then probably about half an hour later, he came back, and he said, I booked your room at the motel in Falcon Lake. He says, it's all paid for, and it's all taken care of. And this was the place that I had called earlier and decided it was a bit rich for me. And so he got me a room, and his wife had a very generous donation, and it just made a beautiful end of quite a day. So I got there and checked in, and it was a really nice place. So it was interesting. It was interesting how the wolf sort of affected me and affected the first fellow that stopped by, and a little later the second fellow, the band chief, he emailed me, and he said that the wolf was not there as a predator but as a protector, and that I shouldn't worry about the encounter at all, other than I'm being protected, and I appreciated that. And so it was quite a day. It was quite a spiritual day, and it's quite interesting seeing the wolf. It's interesting learning about how I was carrying somebody else's fear there for a while, and and how you can get riled up, how you can get caught up in other people's stories, and often lose track of your own way. So that was quite a day, and the wolf was beautiful to see. It was so serene, just sitting there, kind of in the tree line, looking at me, and it was quite beautiful. So so that was my day. It was quite wonderful. Okay, next week we're going to talk about the spirit of the mesa, and how it traveled with me through my journey. Okay, thank you very much. I'll see you later.